Alright, buddy. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Can you guys hear me well?
Loud and clear.
Alright. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second community roundtable put together by the Islamic Finance at SG. Islamic Finance at SG aims to bridge the gap between our community with scholars and finance professionals by addressing the issues raised by our community. Do follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram to stay up to date to our upcoming events that we have. And for your information, this session will be recorded. Before we proceed, allow me to lay out certain ground rules for our listeners here today. And please do not unmute your mic unless being asked to or when opportunity is being given to you to ask questions. Also, we have prepared a platform for you to ask your questions. These questions will be collected and answered towards the end of the session. And the link you can access this by going to slido.com with a code hashtag CRT2. And while you are logged in, feel free to answer the poll that we have over there. Let us take a look at the poll that we have. So currently the question is, which issue of crypto concerns you the most? And the options that we have served you are the scams related to it, its high volatility, acceptance under the government, and also halal under Sharia. So vote, put your votes there, and we see which are the concerns of our community here. We are honored here today to have four very qualified and experienced individuals in our panel who are here to educate us and answer the queries that we have about cryptocurrency. And thank you so much for spending your evening with us here today. And without further ado, allow me to introduce each of our panelists that are here with us today. First, we have Mr. Raj. Mr. Raj Muhammad is a well-known person in the Islamic finance industry. His company, Five Pillars, did the Sharia compliance certification for the listed REIT Sabana, boasting Sharia scholars such as Dr. Ali El Ghadi as his Sharia advisors. Five Pillars also conducts trainings on Islamic finance, such as the Islamic Finance Qualification by Chartered Institute of Securities and Investment UK. Next, we have Dr. Haziq. Dr. Haziq is a multi-skilled professional with substantial and varied experience in strategy, innovation, and operational leadership roles. He has over 20 years of working experience and has spent over 12 years building startups and business consulting, where he has consulted for MSMEs and MNCs on various business-related issues. His past corporate clients also include ASEAN Secretariat, National Finance Officers, and the UNCDF. Next, we have Mr. Aziz. Mr. Aziz was the founder of Master the Crypto, which was acquired by a US-based media group in less than 1.5 years since it was founded. He's also a first-class honors graduate of the prestigious IIUM Islamic Banking and Finance and currently works as the Chief Product Officer of Facet. Next, and lastly, we have Mr. Azman. Mr. Azman is a veteran in the legal financial industry, handling the regional legal head in ABN AMRO as well as legal head for UBS Wealth Management. He then moved to the technology scene and co-founded and successfully exited a robo-advisory business in the Netherlands. He is currently the regulatory director of Upbit, a digital assets trading exchange. Once again, I would like to thank all of our panelists here today for joining us. Thank you. And just a little reminder to our listeners, and also for the benefit of everyone who has just joined us, we have prepared a platform for all of you to ask your burning questions for our panelists. And do include the name of the person to answer your question if you have any preference. Questions can be asked on slido.com, and the code for it is CRT2. Let us take a look where our poll is standing. So it looks like we have 6 votes. Oh, okay, where's the let me just find the oh, okay, looks like I can't see the response here, but it's okay. We will get back to you later. But moving on, let us begin the first question of this community roundtable, and it is directed to all of the panelists here. And just to make it more orderly, may I suggest going with Mr. Raj first, followed by Dr. Haziq, and then Mr. Aziz, and then Mr. Azman. So the first question for today's community roundtable is, share with us, how many years have you been involved in cryptocurrency? And what is the most interesting thing that you find about cryptocurrency?
Assalamu alaikum, and I want to thank the organizers mostly for having my name mentioned in the same breath as esteemed scholars as Aziz, Azmi, and Aziz. I'm very honored to be present in the same panel as them. Um, your question is how many years I've been involved? I think approximately 5 years, seriously. When the frenzy of Bitcoin price was rising phenomenally, but mostly through the retail and speculative interest. Yeah, we invested some money and lost a lot too, but we've recovered in the recent run, right? So that's my experience, and today I think I want to share mostly because I've met a lot of losses and the learning lessons in there, which I'm sure will be very useful for the rest. But as for the what do I find most interesting the aspect, seriously, I think what I find fascinating in this whole aspect is seeing establishments, um, established money managers, financial institutions, central banks. I find their fear to be very interesting. First of all, if you look at that, they all came back and they treated this as nothing but just another internet fad. It will blow through. When Satoshi Nakamoto came up with the Bitcoin, they say, "Oh, it's nothing. It'll come and like Pokemon game, it'll come and it'll just disappear." This kind of. I think that's when they first started. They even brushing it off and ridiculing it. And then secondly, I saw that they were a bit concerned when a lot of coins were being issued. I think at the last count, we have over 8,000 over coins, digital coins, right, have been issued. And then concern, and then after that, there was interest, and now we see them as converts. Because what they have done is, you find that there is fear in them, and then they have now participated in it. We'll talk more about it, but I find this change by the central banks who first they said they would not touch it, and now they are embracing it and thinking and talking seriously about issuing their own sovereign coins to be one of the most fascinating aspects, at least for me.
All right, thank you, Mr. Raj. Can we have Dr. Haziq next?
Okay. Assalamualaikum
Salam.
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you for having me on the panel tonight. It's truly an honor to be speaking on an event that's organized by Islamic Finance at SG. I think they are doing a fantastic job. We are a small market with no formal instruction on Islamic finance, but yet somehow we have put our whatever resources and time that we have to initiate something as important as this. So for myself, when I look at cryptocurrency, I started looking at it in 2016. At that time, I was deep into research or finishing my PhD thesis. And although my research was on behavioral economics, which was what my thesis was on, but I was constantly thinking of ways to improve or gain unfair advantage for the Islamic economy, because we have been, for whatever reason, have been left behind when compared to the conventional economy or the conventional finance system. And I wanted to find a way where we could springboard and quickly compete with them, toe to toe at the same level. So when I look at technology, because I was a practicing engineer for 10 years and I have a bachelor's in engineering, so technology came quite easy for me to understand the blockchain and things like that. So when I looked at the blockchain, I realized that this was something that was very useful or could be very useful for Islamic finance and Islamic economics, because essentially the blockchain to me is like a mechanism of trust. So in many ways, it can solve a lot of the problems moving forward for an economic system or financial system. So this is the reason why I'm very interested.
Dr. Haziq, we seem that we have lost you for a while there. Sorry, Dr. Haziq, it seems that we have lost you for a while there. Oh, are you back already?
Yes, I'm back and I'm actually done.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. Okay, we'll proceed on to the next panel, which is Mr. Aziz. Mr. Aziz, would like to share the more of experience you have with crypto and something that you find interesting about cryptocurrency?
Assalamualaikum. Yep. So basically, I was in this space for the last 6-7 years. Read the Bitcoin white paper while being in a interning at an investment fund, and then I was starts to do blockchain exploration. Once I read the 9-page white paper, I was hooked because this is basically a paradigm shift of the traditional financial system. And then I mean the notion of disintermediation, of empowerment, of a fully inclusive system which is not controlled by a single entity, that was what attracted the sort of like anarchist kind of trait in me. But at the end of the day, the technology has a tremendous amount of potential applications and use cases that frankly to me would make the world a more better and a more as in efficient, as in basically creating a more efficient as in with it creating a more efficient as in financial system.
Thank you, Mr. Aziz. Can we have Mr. Azman to go next?
Excuse me, yes. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this esteemed panel. First of all, in terms of the number of years being involved in crypto, I think I got involved pretty much early on. It was a discussion with my CRO at UBS, which basically sparked my interest about alternative cycle, because it was, as we know, the financial system is always going through boom and bust cycles and periods. And in 2008, we were expecting a large correction in the market, and that was what happened, I think, as everybody's seen. And funnily enough, this very interesting or very mysterious white paper from Satoshi Nakamoto came about. And I think it was back in 2012 that basically me and my former partner then, because I left the bank and then I basically moved into the fintech space. And in part was basically due to this change and transition into the financial system. And basically we experimented with the first Bitcoin where we changed and transferred between wallets, and we found that it was very safe and efficient. But at that point in time, there was very little interest commercially, and we pivoted into a robo-advisory and sort of, my interest then sort of waned. But fast forward 2016, I think when basically I exited my business in the Netherlands, one of the key features, thoughts that I had in mind was basically what next. And then I did a course in a fintech course in Oxford University, which was an online fintech course. And it sort of validated my understanding into this space and where the disruption in the financial system was about to take place. And I think we see that now with the blockchain. And that's in part what makes it most interesting for me in terms of the cryptocurrency space, is the whole notion of blockchain, whereby they basically resolve the problem of the double spend. And essentially they allow for a real trustless system. Basically, I find that part of the inherent problem to this boom and bust financial system and the problems that we've seen is the fact that markets can be manipulated, markets can be changed, and that in part is the fundamental basis of that is trust, or the lack of, obviously, the trust that happened from the 2008 crisis. We can see that as well. And being involved in the banks, I see some of the, I suppose, the negative aspect of this. So clearly it's with this very exciting, new era that I basically decided that I would like to devote my time and energy into this space. And that's where I've joined a crypto exchange since 2018. And very excited to be part of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Azman. Okay, we proceed on to the next question. The next question is directed to Mr. Raj. So Mr. Raj, can you let us know what's the difference between a cryptocurrency and a fiat currency system? And maybe share with us, why do you think there is a need for another currency system when now what we are using as a fiat currency system is already working quite well, I can say? Mr. Raj, you are on mute, Mr. Raj. It happened.
That must be the phrase of the year, actually.
Yes.
I apologize. I'll keep it simple. I think fiat currency is what we now refer to the dollars and coins in your wallets and the bank, right? So it is typically backed by a sovereign, which is typically a government, and then they kind of control the demand and supply through various mechanisms. And some of the challenges of the fiat currency has been its limitless supply. So if the government wants to, boost the economy or manage the economy, they, like what we are seeing in the US, there's just a limitless amount of supply that they could do, versus the cryptocurrency. Not all of them, but Bitcoin, for example, has got a finite number of coins that can be issued, which is 21 million, right? So there is debate still going on it also being a hedge against inflation, right? And if you find that, if you print a lot of money and then the inflationary pressures come about, and that could affect your wealth and etc. So simply put, fiat currency is a legal tender backed by a particular government or a sovereign, while the crypto is not. If you call it, it's not a legal tender, that's simply being not in a particular jurisdiction. That's how it is, right? So as Aziz has very rightfully said, it's kind of a decentralized, no one particular individual or government can control over it. So that's the primary difference you can find between fiat and crypto. And your question is if the current system is working fine, why do we need another? The question then begs, is the current system fine? So that itself is a question that we need to ask, because not necessarily, right? So if you go and ask the jurisdiction whereby, the peso, for example, even sterling, when Brexit came about, you saw it tumbling, and look at Venezuela and those kind of economies, right? So they have been greatly. So Bitcoin did not start itself as wanting to replace. I think what it started off was another avenue, adding on to the list of financial instruments. That's how it started. But what it has slowly become, and it's very, very interesting, is how the markets have accepted it, how the markets are applying it, how the markets are using it. So that's where we can see whether we need or not. I think over time, we will see, because everywhere you go, we are going towards the digital economy, right? I'll end with one very simple thing, right? While we can focus on the Bitcoin and cryptos today, we all have been using some form of digital currency way before this came about. And if you ask me what are those are the loyalty points that you get, right? If you have got your mobile phone, the M1 company gives you loyalty points, your credit card gives you can actually go out to Starbucks and buy yourself a cup of coffee without any fiat currency at all. You know what I mean? So it has already started. So I think what is interesting to see is crypto will generate a good amount of discussion. It will generate a good number of participation, and see whether it's not here to displace it, but it's here to complement it. And that's what I think. And I'm sure we'll share more ideas as we talk.
Thank you so much, Mr. Raj, for that interesting perspective.
Yeah.
So as we realize that with crypto and blockchain, we have a lot of new innovation in terms of the financial instrument. So my next question is to Dr. Haziq. In your perspective, how can innovation or this type of financial innovation create an impact in the Islamic finance economy?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I think the blockchain itself has many prospects for Islamic finance and the Islamic digital economy. A lot of the applications are covered in my latest book, Beyond FinTech, Technology Applications for the Islamic Economy. And I try to cover as many areas of or many sectors of the economy as I can. Actually, the title was Beyond FinTech because finance only. And as a technology, the blockchain, the applications are huge, right? Because you can see the blockchain can be used as not only cryptocurrencies, but they can be used as a ledger or database systems. They can be used as payment systems. And then, of course, for Islamic finance, particularly, I think the greatest use case would be as a smart contract. So its ability to enforce and automate contractual agreements through the smart contract is particularly useful for Islamic finance and the Islamic economy. But of course, when we use technology, we don't use it in silo. It's always integrated with, smart contract is integrated to the payment system, to the escrow system, and all of that. And then it's connected to an AI-driven analytics board where essentially you can create a dashboard to monitor the movement of goods if you're using it as a digital trade finance system. So in theory, when we discuss, we tend to categorize and separate things when we're trying to understand or trying to explain it. But in reality, when you're building a venture, usually we use what is available to our disposal, and we try to keep it to the right use case, the right technology for the right use case. And we don't use it separately, we usually use it together. So yeah, that's my take on that.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Haziq. Can I also ask the same question to Mr. Aziz? Mr. Aziz, can you share with us the types of new innovations that you can see creating an impact in the Islamic economy, Islamic finance economy?
All right, thanks. So I think I will answer this based on two scopes, right? Which is that using, as in the new innovation using crypto and blockchain, and new innovation of the crypto and blockchain that impacts, that serves as basically a new paradigm of the financial system. On the former, what I would say is that adding on to Dr. Haziq is basically especially in the Islamic finance capital market space, right? You can see that what differentiates us and the conventional system is basically the addition of much more layers of transactions, for example, because we are including, say, real assets in Islamic finance, right? So the inclusion of more contractual contracts, new relationships, more intermediaries. So that makes us inherently less efficient, right? And therefore, using smart contracts, which is basically an evolution of blockchain technology. I mean, blockchain is just, a simple as in transparent ledger, but smart contracts within that ledger facilitates smart as in automated contracts that can be executed without any human intervention, right? So that layer of automation can sort of like put us in par with traditional conventional system. So that's using the crypto and blockchain technology to actually add value to current status quo. Now, in terms of new, as in in terms of new, for example, products or services, or a new paradigm of a new ecosystem, basically when we talk about blockchain technology, you can see there's a lot of ways that it could impact Islamic finance from how we do things point of view. For example, we talk about asset tokenization, staking, or DeFi, decentralized finance, which is a very hot topic in crypto. Talking about asset tokenization is basically the ability to digitize and fractionalize a real world asset, for example, a real estate, into the digital realm using blockchains and smart contracts. So that is what I'm currently, as in one of my projects in Facet, basically, which is exploring the viability of such an arrangement. The technology part is the easiest part. The hardest part is conforming and aligning ourselves to regulations, current regulations, right? So those are basically the ways that blockchain can disintermediate. Because if you look, just find an example, right? If you look at how the way the traditional markets work, when you look at how the traditional stock markets come to be in its current form of evolution, right? You can see the existence of the brokers, if you want to buy as in stocks, the existence of brokers, custodians, the custodians of custodians, which is your CSD, Central Securities Depositories, and then market makers, all those kind of, all those kind of actors within the traditional stock market system. They exist because it's basically they want to solve the problem of settlement finality, right? Ensuring that transactions take place with finality, right? And for that to happen, you have to have a lot of these intermediaries where they are compensated for what they do, right? Because they're regulated, and then they are, as in they are well buffered. But with blockchain, you're removing all those layers, and blockchain itself solves all the roles that a traditional financial system has. So that this intermediation is something very powerful that not only can be extrapolated to Islamic finance, but finance as a whole.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Aziz, for the interesting perspective. You can already see how blockchain can also simplify the whole transaction that goes on in even a normal finance industry, not only Islamic finance economy. So moving on to the next question. This is actually a hot topic regarding the volatility in cryptocurrency. So if I may, I would like to direct this question to Mr. Azman. So Mr. Azman, how do you think volatility of a cryptocurrency can affect the use of it as a currency system? I'm sorry, Mr. Azman, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, yes, okay. I think Raj says most used phrase now. Okay, sorry. Coming back to the question, I think these questions, you have to answer it in different parts, because obviously in terms of the use of cryptocurrency itself, I think as we've extrapolated earlier on and explained, there are different aspects of cryptocurrencies. And, cryptocurrencies can be basically divided essentially into a payment types of token, a securities type of token, and obviously a utility type of token. So now having that understanding, and I think the other aspect that you need to understand in any sort of a new innovative product is clearly the question of adoption. And I think when basically it was this back in 2018 when I first came back to Singapore, and I walked into a DBS bank, and when I asked the banker in terms of whether they have available Bitcoin services, the first word that came out of him was that Bitcoin was fraud. And I think this was also supported by the news that you've seen in JP Morgan when you talk about their CEOs extolling the same kind of fear in terms of the market. So what I'm trying to say is, I mean, basically from 2018 and 2021, and we're talking about the price of Bitcoin that went from, I think back then was about $7,000 to $8,000 per Bitcoin to now almost 50,000 Bitcoin. Clearly you've seen that kind of level of volatilities all the way through in terms of, and that I think is to be expected in any growing market and a growing adoption. As more and more people get into cryptos and see its real value in terms of its being an alternative to the current asset classes, you will find that this volatility will continue to spike up until at some stage when we hope that some sort of stability can be enforced. And I think we can talk about the other types of cryptos out there that are introduced to basically create some sort of stability, like the stable coins where USDT and USDC that are being used to try and create that sort of level of volatility. But I think in a new infant, I would still say that we are still at the early stage of adoption. You're going to find a lot of volatility in this space.
Thank you, Mr. Azman, for your answer. So since you are in the topic of volatility, we know that some of us are interested in investing in cryptocurrency. So investing in a cryptocurrency which is highly volatile, there must be risk involved in this investment. So my next question is posed to Mr. Raj. Mr. Raj, what are the risks involved when we are investing in the crypto market?
Okay. There's a whole lot of risk for various participants in this, right? From investor has a risk, investee has a risk, custodian has a risk, and so on and so forth. But I think today, most of us will be interested from the investor point of risk, right? Since most of you are probably looking at how can I participate in this market and obviously want to profit from it, right? I think that's our intention, right? Now, I would always approach risk by asking some very key questions, right? Someone asked me a question the other day and they said, hey, is it halal for me to play in the cryptocurrency? I said, no, it is haram, right? Then the same guy asked, and then another guy asked, can I invest, is investing in cryptocurrency halal? Then I said, yes, right? So if you look at the key difference is intention. One guy wants to play in the market, and what's playing, right? So it's almost tantamount to gambling because you try and make incidental quick profits from it. What else? When somebody say investment, I believe he is with the intention of making some learned and researched, what would I say, decisions to go into the market. So the first and foremost is very important is the intention. Do you want to make quick bucks or do you want to consider it as another asset to diversify into? So it's called diversification. That's what risk management is. So you have got a limited amount of wealth and you want to diversify it so that a fall in one can be mitigated with the rise in another, right? So that's what we want to try and do. So investment always doesn't mean making more, it's also losing less, right? So that's one of the key things somebody has to be aware of. And the second thing is, as our Islamic faith has very strongly advocates, is ikra, is knowledge, read, right? So the question here is, what do you read and who do you go to? And how do you get that? You get that by asking the right questions. And then the next thing is, what are the right questions? So to me, I have three questions that I would ask anyone who would go to anyone else to try and invest. So you could go to an individual who claims to be a crypto expert, and then you say, I'll give you the money and would you invest with me? Which is all right, which is definitely all right. Because in the early days, it was unregulated. We didn't have fund managers. The central bank did not know how to license them, and etc. And then if somebody has got a little bit more knowledge than them, early entry, and it's okay. So the question to ask whoever you give your money to, you entrust your money to, is the question at least I ask is, why should I part with my hard-earned money and give it to you? So that's the first question I ask that individual, all right? And then the second question that I would ask them is, what are you doing to protect my money and my investment, right? So first question, why must I give it to you? And the person has to give all his qualifications, his experiences, his track record, and etc. Then the next question I ask is, why must I give it, what are you going to do to protect my money? Then the person is going to tell you that, hey, listen, the money is kept in a safe custody, in a very big custodian. In the event I disappear, you can go to this party, or you can have this access to get your asset, etc. Whatever, all right? So that's question one, why must I give it to you? Question two, what are you doing to protect my money? And the third most important question, how do I verify and validate the first two questions? Because we are a salesman, we can say anything we want, but how do you validate? How do you verify it? So you got to go and do a little bit of research. So, and then lastly, of course, you must be willing to stomach the risk, right? So there, what is the risk? The risk is I'm ready to lose all, or I'm ready to lose X%. So if you say that my tolerance level is, if you drop within 10%, I'm out, then you got to ensure and put those kind of things into place. I think these are the key risks that one has to be. And then, of course, as this, I still think that this cryptocurrency market is in its nascent stage. There's huge number of development happening. People are still learning. Regulators are still trying to see how they're going to handle this animal seriously, right? So as it develops, I think we're going to find better regulations coming through, and I think there'll be more opportunities. But my one key point, and I'll end with that, is that I hope Muslims will look into it, right? Because if Muslims become wealthy, right, and I think you can become wealthy by participating in this new technology, we become good influencers, right? Because as a community that pays zakat and have strong faith, we can influence, because people with wealth influence. You saw what happened, Trump did. He has absolutely nothing but he was able to influence because he's perceived as a billionaire. Right? I'll end with that, and I'll take more questions later. Anything on this? Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Raj. That's a really interesting perspective for yourself. And I believe those who are here attending these events, they are here to educate themselves on cryptocurrency itself. So that is also part on their part of education. So moving on, I've just checked the poll and I guess, or I realized that most of the response there, they are interested in whether cryptocurrency is halal under Sharia or not. And this is where we are going into our next topic here. So I would like to address this question to Dr. Haziq. Dr. Haziq, we have seen that cryptocurrency is very volatile. So does it mean that when we invest in cryptocurrency, it is sort of like we are gambling when we invest? And then what is the light of Sharia inside this perspective?
Okay, so there's two parts to that question you asked. First one is about how does the Sharia look at volatility? And then the second one is whether cryptocurrencies in general, are they a halal investment asset class or not? So let me answer the second question first. I think when you look at cryptocurrencies, it is very easy to look at it as a broad brush, right? Especially when you don't know that there are more than 8,000 type of tokens and coins that's out there. So it's very difficult to, intuitively, it's very difficult to give, if you want to say like a blanket fatwa on 8,000 product items. I think we never do that in the Sharia space or any Sharia committee. In their right mind, we never do that. So we always look at each product based on its particular use case. So we always look at the product itself, how it's been issued, how is it being used, what was the reason that it was first designed. Because sometimes when you design something, the way it's used for is for another thing, right? So we look at the intention of the designer, and then we look at how it's actually being used out in the market, and then the processes that encompass the use of the cryptocurrency. So before we can actually say something is halal or haram, we have to look at its use case first, right? So for instance, if a cryptocurrency, and a lot of it is used as a utility token, right? So what is it used for, right? Is it as a means of exchange? Does it have a store of value? There's equity and some asset-backed value to it and things like that. So once you are able to categorize the particular use case, then you can apply the Sharia towards it, right? So if it's used just for a means of exchange, the Sharia rules for means of exchange will apply to it. If it has some kind of security or some kind of asset value, then the Sharia rules on asset and equity will apply to that particular token or coin. So this is, I think, a simple way to quickly understand whether something is, most likely will be halal or not halal. Okay, so that's my short answer to the second question. The answer to the first question is when something is very volatile, obviously there is some underlying issues with it, right? So from an investment standpoint, this is not even from a Sharia standpoint, from an investment standpoint, when something is very volatile, in order to protect your wealth, the first step logically is to find out what's going on that's causing this volatility, right? So the Sharia is a fantastic way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His wisdom has prescribed to us because He wants to give us a framework of, in terms of, in times of uncertainty, that we have a framework to fall back on so that we know something is, prescribed to you or something that's proscribed to you. Proscribed means that you are not supposed to do. Right, it's just a framework to guide your behaviors in times of uncertainty, because maybe your lack of knowledge or something is very new, like cryptocurrency and all that stuff. So when you see a lot of volatility, my understanding of, or my fiqh understanding of what the Sharia tells you is to approach it cautiously, right? Because you need to really understand what's causing that volatility. and really understand something before you actually put any part of your hard-earned wealth into it. So that would be my short answer to your first question. I hope it addresses the issues that you want. If not, we can look at it again at the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haziq. Inshallah, it's good. Alright.
Sorry, can I add just a bit, because I think there needs to be justice in terms of how we approach volatility equals. If many people says, oh, cryptocurrency, we shouldn't look at it because it's volatile and therefore it's haram or impermissible. I think that's a very unfair characterization. You have to understand that, as in, volatility is a natural part of public markets, right? It doesn't mean, as in, that is not just unique to cryptocurrencies. Any nascent or any public market, volatility is prone. Volatility will as in is a natural part of the market, right? So we cannot just link that equation, volatility means haram. Even when you talk about even if you talk about Gharar in any transaction, you have to understand the underlying risk factors, right? For example, as in the uncertainty of the subject matter, or the over the price transaction itself. And if you just look from that substance approach rather than look at as an external factor like price volatility, you can see that blockchain it's as in blockchain with blockchain technology, all the uncertainty about the subject matter, for example, you must be in possession. Well, guess what? As in transparent ledger, there is finality in terms of settlement. So it's gonna be as in using blockchain. That is closer to the substance of Sharia rather than how traditional markets work. Because believe it or not, any stock that you own through a broker isn't technically yours under a legal name, because you get beneficial ownership, but your name is not in the registrar, right? Which is owned by a subsidiary of a CSD, right? So they look into the form of, for example, the technology, and technology is agnostic, right? We shouldn't paintbrush it in any ways, right? Like internet. So I think we should keep that in mind whenever we discuss, for example, oh, it's volatile, therefore it's haram. That very one-sided as in argument.
Thank you, Mr. Aziz. That's a really interesting clarification and perspective from yourself. I think we can now move on to the next section of the discussion. So the next section is regarding regulatory. So my question is towards Mr. Azman, who has been in the regulatory space for quite a long time. So Mr. Azman, how has the regulation with regards to blockchain transformed over these past few years?
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, I've seen personally, because in terms of this legal and regulatory in the financial space, I've seen a lot of changes, a lot of new introduction of new laws that are being introduced. Governments, I think, around the world are trying to come to terms with how do we regulate cryptocurrency and obviously the different types of cryptocurrency that exists. And clearly, I think being involved since the early days, so I've seen the changes that have come forward. I mean, in the past, I think, as I think some of you may know, they've now allowed crypto exchanges and cryptocurrencies to operate in Singapore as long as they are not securities, and therefore they need to be licensed. But I think over the last few years, they are also trying to introduce new regulatory requirements in relation to tokens or cryptos that are considered payments themselves. So what I'm saying is essentially that you have seen now the licensing requirement of all of those crypto spaces. I think this is something that is welcome. Clearly in terms of it gives a lot of more certainty to the public. And I think, as Mr. Raj pointed out about the risks from the investor perspective, you want to know that the people that you are dealing with are also regulated by the powers that be. And in this case here in Singapore, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, or MAS. And I am also aware that because I'm also involved in the licensing requirements in Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, and further up the field as well. Every countries around the world are taking some sort of a step towards regulating crypto space, and the same is also in Europe, in the US as well. So what I'm seeing as well, a further defining of the types of regulation that you can see. I think one of the biggest concern apart from scams, and therefore, the fact that players now have to be licensed is a good thing. The other concern that was raised about cryptocurrency was the incidence of the use of that crypto, meaning some people are saying that it's because the fact that it's anonymous, that it can be used by the criminals for fraudulent and nefarious means, money laundering and so on and so forth. So now that we've seen with the introduction of the regulation and the regulatory space in terms of requiring licensing, so those crypto players who are providing those services will also have to ensure that the money laundering and the terrorist financing aspect of it has to be looked into. And I think also recently you start to see they are trying to introduce bank-like. When I say bank-like, is when you transfer cryptos from one exchange to another, they require the sender and the recipient of those cryptos to be disclosed, like in a banking transaction, like SWIFT. So we see this introduction as well in terms of the travel rule. So we are seeing in the regulatory space, it's the most exciting that I've seen in the last decades or so, because we've seen a whole slew of regulatory framework changes and amendments to the current system to adapt to this new way of thinking. And I think that it's such a big, of course, influence in terms of the public space, because obviously with that, you start to see a growing adoption. People are getting more confident and trust in the space. So of course, you got to make sure that you're dealing with a regulated or licensed entity, and making sure that those identity are in compliance with all of the regulatory requirements as they should be. So I think in that sense, it's a positive, but at the same time, obviously, it adds another layer of complexity to players like ourselves in trying to make sure that we have all of those controls and monitoring system in place. So I think those I think are the big changes that I see coming. I'm not sure whether you have any more question regarding that, Azmi. The central government.
I think it touches a lot of the things that we are expecting from you, which is the regulation, how it transforms, and how this transformation has led to the increase in acceptance by the public itself. And so I think what we can the next question would be to Mr. Aziz, which we would like to see because of his. I would like to tap on his experience in the Middle East market. So, Mr. Aziz, working in the Middle East, have you seen an increase in the public acceptance of using cryptocurrency in their daily lives?
Yeah, so we run a regulated crypto exchange here, a fiat gateway crypto exchange, meaning that users can use their local currencies to buy cryptocurrencies here in the Middle East. Across the GCC, we operate in 5 countries, and we are extremely familiar with the regulators on a daily, on a very personal relationship across all the regulators. It's very important to have that, because here, I mean, they are very careful. I mean, and their regulatory framework isn't as robust as where you say Singapore or the USA, things like that, right? So what you have to do is carefully align yourself to the regulatory frameworks globally, from a global point of view, and then as in how that transpires into our operational process. In terms of adoption, just from a user perspective, I mean, I run an exchange. So in the last 2 months, we see an increase of 300 to 400% of users on our platform that trades, So you can see that there's a huge influx of users there. But the only thing, for example, missing is, number one, a more robust regulatory framework, like what Singapore did under the as in the Payments Act that they launched last year, as well as basically education. So more people understanding, hey, crypto is just more than, as in an investment tool, but more explaining or explicating the underlying technology and its potential use cases.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aziz. I would like to revert back to Mr. Azman. I think we missed out the important point on how central government will actually play a part in terms of establishing regulation that might influence the regulation with regards to the usage and acceptance of cryptocurrency, because cryptocurrency is supposed to be a decentralized economy itself, but central government, can they impose regulation to affect the acceptance of decentralized economy in a public space?
Oh, very good question. Obviously, when you are dealing with innovation, when you're dealing with new products and services, you're dealing as well with how do you deal with the existing. And clearly, we were talking about a very disruptive and innovative technology here, in which you are taking out the intermediaries, as some of my learned colleagues in this panel have said before, in terms of one of the biggest advantage of cryptos is the blockchain technology, because when you can do a trustless payment system where you don't require intermediaries to step into place, and it's a lot more secure, and it's a lot more trustworthy. So basically, the government, when they're dealing with this kind of issues, obviously are very concerned about how do you then deal with the existing players, because clearly they have a role. When you disintermediate, you're ruling out the brokers, you're ruling out the custodian banks, because settlement is automatic. You're ruling out trustees, because previously a lot of these are held there when you allow the securities lending and so on and so forth. So a lot of these intermediaries potentially can be out of business when you introduce the crypto. So the government has to be playing a very, how do I say it, a very cautious cat and mouse play as they allow adoption to come through. And I think that's what we are seeing. In terms of the introduction of the regulation has been quite slow, because Bitcoin has been around for the last 10 years. And I think it's only now that recently a lot of countries around the world are dealing with it. And it's only the reason is because in part, how the government is going to treat that. And you see that in some of the countries like China and India, where they outrightly ban Bitcoin, for instance. But obviously, that's not the way you're going to deal with something as important and an historic making, as a Bitcoin, because it will just force things to go underground. And I think we start to see some of that, because Bitcoin is borderless, and therefore you can, as long as you have internet, you can buy cryptos anywhere and from anywhere. So you have this opportunity now to basically deal with a very innovative asset class, without being, locked down within your own country or jurisdiction. So coming back to that question, what I'm trying to say is clearly the government in every country are very concerned about how crypto needs to be regulated. And I think the Singapore government is probably one of the, I would say that takes a lot more balanced approach in terms of cryptos, where they categorize the different types of token between payment, and Bitcoin falls into that categories, and securities token, whereby you need a separate license and separate regulatory requirements in that. So you need to find that nice balance between the framework. And I think we were lucky here in Singapore because we have a very extensive legal and regulatory framework. And I think it goes in part to answer some of that question. Does more regulation stifle innovation? The short answer is yes, clearly, because of the regulatory time and effort, and it needs to be invested. But at the same time, as you can see, because it could also be a way to instill confidence and trust in the new space. So what I'm saying is we have to play a very nice balancing act between the two, and to allow the crypto adoption with very balanced regulation, but at the same time, not to do too much, in part, therefore not stifling those innovative solutions that's coming into the space. And I hope that answers the question.
Yes, Mr. Azman, that's a very comprehensive answer in terms of how government taking a very balanced approach in dealing with the regulation surrounding the cryptocurrencies. So I think we are almost reaching the end of this segment. So let's just go towards the last question of this community roundtable. And this last question is directed to all of the panelists over here. So as usual, we go by the order of Mr. Raj, Dr. Haziq, and then Mr. Aziz and Mr. Azman. So the last question for today's roundtable would be, Mr. Raj, in 5 years, what are your vision to see where cryptocurrency or crypto itself in our community, where do you want it to be?
Well, the utopian state would be for us to be subscribers and users of this technology, not only from the financial part of it, but I think, you could definitely have a lot of innovations if you want to have investments. One of the key things that's always Muslims are asking, or in fact have being a proponent in Islamic finance, there is a dearth of innovation in Islamic finance, right? There's always been only the equity and of course on the debt side is the sukuk, right? We barely have anything on the hedge fund. Hedge fund came and went, and we have done nothing. The word hedging is one of the most necessity on Islamic finance. Hedging is Sharia compliant. When you have an investment, you have to hedge, you have to protect. And we all know the hadith that follows it, right? So there's nothing done on the hedge fund side. We have smattering activities in the private equity side. And then we do hear something on the family offices. So I really wish that the Muslim community will look into it, support it, subscribe it, study, innovates, and fund it, and try and see if we can do something so that the community gets wealthy. When they do wealthy, our zakat would help the underprivileged, right? And then when we build wakaf, there is sustainability in the wealth. So I think we can do definitely a lot more. I hope one of my, I always share it with the administrators of IFSC, so we talk a lot and we seldom get into action, and I hope we would. And we have the capability, we have the talent, we have the ability, and just looking at this panel, Aziz has done phenomenally well in the Middle East, and so as my other colleagues who have done well. And we have that, and I definitely think we can do more. And we need not always wait for an authority to give us direction, right? The fact is decentralized gives us a lot of ability. And I'll end with one thing. Just look at this incident. Al-Azhar University, or rather, Egypt has banned cryptocurrency. Read the headlines. And obviously they took direction from Al-Azhar University. And when you read that article, Al-Azhar University, why did they ban it? A, they say that there's no central authority, right? There's no central authority, number one. And number two, they claim that it funds terrorism and other forms of deviant activities. And number three, it says it funds the local oppositions in the country, right? So these are the three reasons cited. And mind you, you couldn't do a Google, and these were the real three reasons that were cited. So just imagine Muslims all over the world who look into Al-Azhar University as an influencer. So he reads the paper and says Al-Azhar calls it haram, and the whole world will now treat it as haram. But what were the reasons they were given? So if you look at the financial markets, central bank only came into effect in the late, the 1850s or so, right? So there was no central bank concept until much later. So that doesn't mean everything that were treated as currency prior to the central bank or central authority can be deemed as haram. It's not, right? And then just like how a knife can be used for good or bad purpose, yes, people have used it to fund. They have found the loophole and they took advantage of it. But look at all the benefits that it brought about, right? Look at the way that one can transfer funds from point A to point B internationally with much less cost and much efficiency, right? And then finally, just because they are funding the local opposition, so it's a political reasons given to give what? A fatwa on global fatwa. So I think we all must be very careful about when we read this kind of the fatwas and news, and then try and come together and then have a very robust discussion. So like my learned colleagues have said, challenge them. Ask them, why do you think this is true? On what basis you are calling it acceptable and what's not? So don't come in and say things like, is cryptocurrency haram? Absolutely not. 8,000, look at the application. There are people who have developed coins for gambling and for wine production and for other things that are called haram. But look at the others there. There are thousands of them that are permissible and are making life easy and the social conditions of some of the very challenged, economically challenged environment easy. So I really wish that Muslims would come together, support and challenge each other and try and get benefit out of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Raj. Can we have Dr. Haziq to go next?
Yes, I think one of the ways that they have solved the volatility of cryptocurrency is by pegging it to commodities and even to sovereign fiat and things like that. So that's where the introduction of stable coins have come in to play. So I think there was one sure-footed direction of solving the volatility issue. We're not talking about market fluctuations because that one is normal, but we're talking about extreme volatility, right? What I find interesting in the crypto space right now is the keen introduction of CBDCs, which is the central bank issued digital currencies. What makes it very interesting is that these digital currencies are legal tender because it's issued by central banks of different countries. And then it will facilitate trade and, there are 4 formats that I looked at in a CBDC and it's discussed in chapter 9 in my latest book, Beyond FinTech. And then we looked at it as, first format was as a cash, second as public deposit, third as a monetary policy tool, and then lastly as an interbank settlement, which a lot of countries have adopted because once they look at the different formats of the CBDC, this was the one that would have would be giving them the most benefits if they were to issue a CBDC for their own country. So another interesting thing is when you look at the economy at large, right? Especially when China announced the issuance of their digital yuan, right? Which is the Chinese CBDC. I think that one has significant implications to the power play of the world, right? The US is the current superpower, which seems to be weak because of the poor leadership that he has seen over the last administration. And then with the rise of China and their aggressive movements to the Belt and Road Initiative, right? And then the reach of the Belt and Road through Europe and then through the sea route down to ASEAN, they have built the necessary infrastructure to facilitate trade for themselves, right? And now introducing the digital yuan, it will facilitate that kind of trade even further because it will reduce currency risk and all that stuff if everybody starts to trade on the digital yuan, which will be much easier moving forward after the issuance. So you see that the dominance of the next superpower is through economic dominance. And you can see that steps that China has taken to move into that direction. So I think this is a very important space, at least to me, it's a very interesting space which I'm looking at and how things are going to play out in this way. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Haziq. Can we have Mr. Aziz to share your visionary, your 5-year vision of where the community, where you would like to see crypto in our community?
Yeah, I think this is, I remember in the class back when I was majoring in Islamic finance, and I was asking like naively, right? There was a standard chart as in representative there. And then I asked him, so what are the actual assets? Like, can you tell me the actual, can you define for me the assets that you have that makes under your Islamic window? And then he said that, oh, the asset is basically the conventional, which is Standard Chartered's hit conventional assets, which is basically the bank's asset, right? Accounts receivables, all that, which to me is kind of a dissonance when you talk about being a Sharia compliant asset, supposed to be an underpinning of say an Islamic window. Then from that point onwards, I was very disillusioned with Islamic finance and its implementation. And therefore, when I ventured my way in the crypto and blockchain space, I see, hey, this is a natural equalizer, that, natural empowerment as in an all-inclusive society where, there is very little barriers to entry and anyone can participate as long as you have a computer. So that has been my goal ever since, which is, educating people on crypto and its use cases and its technology. and that's why I created Master Crypto, and that's why I am now as in spearheading the launching of many products and services to actually get people to expose themselves to cryptocurrencies. So within 5 years, what I plan to continue doing is basically get people to experience and understand this technology via cryptocurrencies, and then from there building. And I'm pretty sure the community, as in the crypto community, is very, very active in actually streamlining and simplifying stuff so easily that even your grandmothers can actually get in on this, right? Because they can actually feel the tangibility in that. So I think this is a constant work of product, as in constant, as in progress that us in the crypto community is working towards. How do we get mainstream adoption of people, as in for people being in the digital realm?
Thank you, Mr. Aziz. Next, can we have Mr. Azman?
Thank you. I think it was one of the surveys that I read somewhere that basically there are 2 billion people in the world today that do not have any access to financial services, bank accounts, and so on and so forth. And I think we all know that how difficult it is sometimes to deal with banks. The requirements of papers, informations, and so on and so forth. So basically, they being the intermediary dictates basically how, when, what you paid, how much you transferred money, and so on and so forth. And my journey, I've been a couple of decades now in the regulatory space of banking and finance. I've seen this myself in terms of firsthand about some of those things that are impeding, holding back, and in terms of some of the values that are extracted, in terms of some of the that happens in the marketplace. And I think clearly in the context of the fact that a lot of this trusts that are being placed on the intermediaries, and in the context of a boom bust cycle. So when Bitcoin came about, I thought, and then understanding it further now after 10 years with all of these smart contracts and blockchain, it really gives us a real opportunity beyond just cryptocurrency trading or investing. We need to look further, I think, as a Muslim community, to understand what this thing can do for us in terms of, I think recently you saw the news in the press about Malaysia. Some of the meat that we receive are not halal because it's being substituted by some, we want to mention the kind of meat that they're replacing the kind of food that we are taking. Now, clearly with blockchain and the ability to create a real Internet of Things, you can really scrutinize, from the time that the cows or the chicken are being slaughtered in a Muslim way and recorded all the way through. And don't forget, the blockchain is immutable, meaning whatever record that goes in cannot be changed, cannot be edited, cannot be corrected, it cannot be manipulated in another sense. So I hope that in the next 5 years, as a Muslim community, and starting here with the ones here today, that we are able to really look forward and beyond and take full advantage of what's available to us, in terms of growing and developing something that of real value that all of us as Muslims can be proud of. And me personally, being part of the banking and finance circles and in regulatory space, I clearly see the opportunity and the real potential that we can really create a real Islamic finance platform, not relying on the conventional, I think as my brother Aziz put up just now, and I agree with him wholeheartedly, that a lot of today's Islamic finance are, I think, sorry to say this, backdoor riba, some of them are being said. So what I'm saying is now with blockchain, smart contracts, with very capable people all around the world in communities such as us, we can really truly build something that we all can be proud of. And I'm, having this experience, hope to be part of that process in some shape or form, not because of anything other than the fact that we are Muslim and we have this, very equitable system that we would like our lives to be regulated by. So that's my hope and vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Azwan, and thank you to all panelists here who give us great vision on their take on the next 5 years in our community. And as we can see, their vision is not only limited to the space of cryptocurrency, but also how blockchain can help our Islamic ecosystem to prosper better and make us a better community as a whole. So we will now shift to the next segment of this CRT, which is the question and answer section. So I would like to open to the floor for anyone here who has any questions. You may unmute your mic for a while, maybe maximum for about 2 minutes. Introduce yourself, and ask questions to whoever you want. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to do that. And for those of you who are shy, you can also log on to slido.com and enter in the code CLT2 and ask your questions from there. Okay, if there's no one in this chat group who would like to ask any questions, we'll just go to the Slido and look at the question. So looks like we have a famous a top voted question, which with the alternative consensus algorithm in blockchain technology, proof of stake, what is the ruling of crypto staking? So maybe I can direct this question to Dr. Haziq. Dr. Haziq, would you like to take this question?
Sorry, which question is that?
With the alternative consensus algorithm in the blockchain technology, which is a proof of stake, what is the ruling regarding crypto staking?
I think crypto staking is quite new, but I think it will enable you to, put up the coins that you earn on an investment platform, and then you can profit from there. But I think in order to give a particular religious ruling, more has to be done. For me personally, and I think this is the tradition of the Islamic scholars, the proper way to do things is to do a proper ijtihad, which is to look at the entire system properly and how they are doing the staking, and then how the the profitability of assets that you put that you stake in a particular platform, and how profit is derived from there. So I wouldn't give a particular ruling just by looking at crypto staking is halal or crypto staking is haram. I think our tradition is always in a very cautious manner. We look at everything holistically before we decide to have an opinion on something. Okay, and a fatwa is a legal opinion, right? It's not a hukum. So it will vary from a person to person, because sometimes if you're not familiar with Islamic terms, you tend to view fatwa as almost as high as hukum, but it's not.
Okay.
Sorry, can I jump in here? Totally agree with Dr. Haziq, but I think it's important to understand the taxonomy of crypto staking, and then we can move from there, right? From my experience and from my knowledge, crypto staking is divided into 3 taxonomies. Number 1 is basically the consensus protocol level, which is what the question is suggesting towards, which is proof of stake. At this level, basically anyone, if you want to be part of this system, all you have to do is get that coin and then stake. And if you are, as in you do work, and what is your work? You validate transactions, and then you are rewarded for it. So proof of stake is essentially you are doing the work, and you are stake based, as in you are rewarded based on the stake that you give. If you stake 10% of the total mineable coins, you get 10%, as in you will get the equivalent rewards. Proof of stake. As in that, to me, as in I'm not a scholar, but working and then getting reward, that is a clear-cut, for example, relationship. Now, the second category of staking is basically centralized exchange staking. And this is where it gets sort of like gray to red, right? Because it's basically like an exchange, a centralized exchange gives staking products, which is essentially like a loan, like fixed deposits. You stake 6 months, you get X%, right? And that, I'll leave it to the scholars, but it looks to me like clear-cut fixed deposits, bank conventional products. And the last, which is to me very interesting, is at the project level. At the when you talk about a specific project, they have staking, right? For example, this project can be built on the Ethereum blockchain, which is going towards proof of stake, right? But that is different, because Now we are not talking about proof of stake, we are talking about staking in that project level, which is built on, say, Ethereum. So if you look at that project level staking, there's usually 3 levels, right? Which is, number one is liquidity mining. Liquidity mining, as in, is basically the project gives up rewards to those who stake for liquidity. Pretty straightforward. As in, for the second part is basically tokenomics inflation, where, for example, how they reward users to stake that project is they have a yearly inflation. For example, as in this year they have 100 coins, next year they have 105 coins, so there's 5% inflation, right? That 5% is given to those who stake in that as in project. And the last, which I think is great to read in this decentralized environment under the project level, is basically as in lending staking under the project level, which again, fix as in you stake in a decentralized way. That's how it differentiates with decentralized staking, but this is decentralized, but the same concept is decentralized but fixed returns, fixed deposits. So based on that taxonomy, then I think it's a much we have a clearer as an understanding on the different layers of staking, because I can promise you, when you Google what is crypto staking, I mean, there's so much stuff that sort of like, I mean, it's very, very, very confusing. And especially if you're new, as in, these nuances is really important for you to build.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aziz, for breaking down what staking really means. And I think after you have broken down what it means into the 3 categories, you can clearly see and I think it's only fair that we derive or we form our own opinions of what staking is in those different categories. So we move on to the next question: regulatory landscape and forecast. I think this has been briefed by Mr. Azman. Maybe I would just ask Mr. Azman if you'd like to delve in further into the regulatory landscape and forecast in crypto, or I mean, on cryptos in Singapore.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Only for Singapore, I think it's very bullish. Obviously, we saw the DBS, one of the largest bank in Singapore, entering into this space. And I can tell you there are a lot of others who are very, very keen to get into this. So Singapore has sort of more or less settled on its regulatory framework. And in terms of the licensing regime and the AML, CFT, travel rule, and so on and so forth. So I'm very bullish about the regulatory landscape that the Singapore government has put in place, and I think it only means that we're going to see more adoption in Singapore in the coming years to come.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Azman. Okay, let's proceed on to the next question. I believe some of these questions have been answered during the CRT itself, and I would just ask those who have not been answered. All right, what are the risks to retail investors? Maybe I would like to direct these questions to Mr. Raj. Mr. Raj, are you okay to take these questions?
Oh, yeah, no worries. Like I mentioned before, retail investors, well, obviously the risk is the amount you invest in. One of the key things that tend to happen is, greed can sometimes raise its ugly head, and then if you look at the returns that something like Bitcoin can bring over a very short period of time, can be quite heady. So there's this concept called FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. Sometimes that can creep in, and then you will just try and participate and ensure that you want to get a piece of the action. Prior to this, it has been the stock market, and now this provides. So volatility is one, right? Volatility, as the name implies, comes from the root word volatile, right? So volatile means the price movements within a short period has got huge swings, right? So people tend to look at the Bitcoin at 40 and then now it's at 55. Oh, am I missing 11? Let me try and get into it, right? So if you want to participate in those kind of things, you must be willing to lose when the 55 becomes 40 again, right? So what do you mean by willing to lose? which means you don't put your savings into this asset class and expect to become just right on the way up, right? So retail investors got to look at various things, and then your knowledge of technology. Because if you look at the language used, there's this thing called, wallets, e-wallets, right? And then you've got this thing called fiat to crypto and crypto to crypto, right? So which platform do you go to? And then obviously you've got to keep your eyes and ears open on everything that you read on scamming, and this can easily get scammed. And I've seen, look at it, right? Why did it take institutional investors 1 decade to come on board this industry? 10 years, right? So you got to understand that. So on that note, you got to be careful about where you invest to. So the question then is, do I lose out? Do I stay? What do I do? So the few things that we could do is, we are not in any way promoting it, but if you look at it, some of the bigger names that has been accepting Binance, for example, is quite reliable, or not. I'm not endorsing it, but it's a name that we find a lot of them have used it. So you could actually hold the coins yourself, or you could go, and the easy way is to trade on Bitcoin ETF, and I think a few of them are coming on board, right? So those are like stock market. ETF is exchange traded funds. That could also give you some exposure. But I believe organizations or groupings like IFSG can play a role, right? So if there are enough masses that ask me, I am an absolute novice, I really don't know where to start, can you do something like that? And I'm sure we have enough people in this room that can give you the helping hand in that. But most carefully, so my short answer is, please be very careful. Please invest amounts that they're totally willing to lose. There is a company that just went bust 2 days ago called Talk Asia, and I see TORQUE. Do a Google on it, and they've just taken a lot of money and they've just gone bust. I've had a conversation with Aziz on this before, and he gave me the one word that it's scam the minute you look at them. So be very careful which platform you use, and I'm sure platform like IFSD can help in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Raj. Maybe my next question could be to Mr. Aziz. So the question is, what are the challenges to have this cryptocurrency from Islamic value, Islamic banking institution, and legal terms? So I think the question is directed to is about how can we have cryptocurrency in a Islamic that contains an Islamic value or being adopted in Islamic banking institution. Mr. Aziz, are you okay to accept this question?
Yeah, sure. So there's a bifurcation, right? Number one is as in the technology of cryptocurrency, which is blockchain, and how it's aligned to Sharia. Second is basically how can Islamic finance basically how can value be added in the ISFIN space. So basically on the first point, I would say that the technology is agnostic, right? It doesn't and Sharia is for the betterment of the world, right? Not only Muslims. So from that approach, we can see that, as long as the technology, the technology is used as it's intended with very little or no fundamental, elements that makes it prohibitive, then obviously, you can, you can say that blockchain as a technology would be Sharia compliant, because it adds tremendous amount of value because of disintermediation, empowerment, store of value, and a very legit payment method. Now, when we talk about how is the Islamic finance industry can actually leverage on this, as I said earlier at the start, Islamic finance inherently it's more inefficient because there's a lot more stuff being added to make it halal, right? More contracts, more terms, basically a lot more resources required to validate that as Sharia compliant. Therefore, with technology, with blockchain technology, where it in itself is a registrar, it's a trustless ledger where people can just, you know, you don't, as in it's trustless, right? So it's censorship resistant. It achieves finality, which is very important in finance. So with that, what we can see is that, hey, look, if Islamic finance does want to innovate, right, then it's high time that they look at enterprise blockchain solutions that and do a viability analysis to see how they can add value to the current status quo. I personally have, as in my company Facet personally has worked with a commodity murabaha as in platform based in the UK. And then, you know, all the things that I learned in Islamic finance, and what I hear from the Islamic finance players, it's there in the sense that, yes, there are real issues that makes us Islamic finance non-competitive on a global level, because there's so much more layers to it, right? How do we try to stay competitive or innovate? Basically exploring of blockchain, and you can basically automate using smart contracts, and, you know, can really streamline the delivery and payment leg of, say, commodity murabaha. So those are the innovations that the industry in itself needs to jump on board if they want to get ahead, you know, or because if not, I would see that many of them are very comfortable, the incumbents. So there might be less, as in they might be resistant to some sort of change. And that is why it's very important for those outside of the circle, from a corporate, as in point of view, to actually come up with those solutions which can natively integrate into existing incumbents' legacy systems.
I think also to add to that, along with blockchain, you can integrate AI and IoT. And I think maybe one of the things that the Islamic finance community can think about is, if we are really unhappy about how Islamic banking or finance is being implemented, you can always think about starting a digital bank, because there are digital licenses that are being issued by several countries. And then through use of technology, you can implement Islamic finance the way you think that it should be implemented. And you can conceptualize like, okay, this is the proper way of doing finance, or, you know, doing asset and wealth management, which I also covered in one chapter of my book, where you integrate all technologies together to get the robo-advisory and predictive analytics through AI, but you get the regulatory, you know, compliance, ease of regulatory compliance through the blockchain, because everything's recorded on the ledger anyway. So this is a huge opportunity for, I think, the Islamic finance community at large, globally. This is, you know, the right time, and the technology has developed sufficiently or matured sufficiently that we can embark on something that instead of just criticizing and, you know, expressing our displeasure and on stuff like it, to actually work on something together, and then we can move forward, move the Islamic finance and Islamic economics forward. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Haziq and Mr. Aziz, for giving us your perspective. And unfortunately, I'm looking at the time now, it's 9:30 p.m. and I think we have come to the end of this session. And I would like to apologize for those questions who are not given the chance to get answered. But you can join us in our Telegram group. We do occasionally share some perspective and ask some questions in our Telegram group or WhatsApp group. So you can join in the discussion also. So before I end off this session, I would like to pass the mic to Ridwan, who's going to facilitate in the photo taking